In the heart of a frozen mountain wilderness, a 5-year-old girl sat shivering in the snow. Her thin pink coat a fragile shield against the biting cold. Only moments before, the car that had carried her deep into the woods vanished down the road, abandoning her in the silence without a single word of farewell. For years, she and her mother had existed in the shadows, imprisoned by a cruel woman who demanded their absolute silence, and a father who was always present, yet never found the courage to intervene. Now, as the snow deepened and the wind howled, the small girl whispered her mother's name, certain her plea was lost to the storm. Miles away, a retired Navy SEAL moved through the same woods, his old faithful canine at his side. Abruptly, the dog froze in its tracks. The man felt it too, an unsettling disturbance in the air. Something was profoundly wrong, and in that icy stillness, a child was waiting for a miracle. Before we continue, let us know where you're joining us from. And if this story touches your heart, please consider subscribing so you won't miss another story of loyalty, bravery, and spirit. Your support truly means everything to us. Winter held the mountains of Leavenworth in its unyielding grip, where massive pines stood like sentinels, entombed beneath a heavy blanket of snow, and the wind carried a chill so sharp it felt alive, searching for any sign of warmth. Ethan Hale was 39 years old when his world shattered. His was the frame of a man forged by a lifetime of rigorous discipline and unwavering self-control. His broad shoulders bore not a sense of pride, but the immense weight of his past. His face was chiseled and weathered by time and trial. A sharp jawline was softened by a coarse beard grown not from intention, but from apathy. His dark hair, once meticulously kept to military precision, now hung just a little too long beneath a wool cap streaked with gray. He had the kind of eyes that held your gaze without flinching, deep-set, unwavering, yet profoundly distant, the eyes of a man who had witnessed too much and learned the terrible price of being a moment too late. For the better part of his adult life, Ethan had operated in the shadows as a Navy SEAL tasked with high-level security missions that never saw the light of day. He navigated mortal danger with a serene precision entrusted with the very lives of men who molded the course of nations. He once held the unwavering belief that control, discipline, and preparation could safeguard everything he cherished. He was profoundly wrong. The devastating call reached him on a frigid morning deep in hostile territory as he was escorting a government official to safety. The mission was a picture of perfection, flawlessly executed without a single error, without a single loss. But back home, his wife was driving their daughter to school that day. Sarah Hale was the very antithesis of Ethan, where he was a fortress, solid and guarded. She was willowy and tall, her warm brown skin radiating a light that defied the seasons. Her hair a thick cascade of chestnut, tumbled in untamed waves she never saw a reason to restrain. A smile came so naturally to Sarah, her voice a gentle current, a believer in small compassions. Even when the world offered none back, she would lovingly chide Ethan for the weight he carried so seriously, whispering that the world needed tenderness just as much as it needed strength. Their daughter had been blessed with Sarah's laugh. The road that morning was a treacherous ribbon of ice, a sharp, unforgiving curve a single moment too fast. The car spun into chaos. By the time the call reached Ethan, Sarah and their little girl were already gone. He never wept where eyes could see. He stood like stone as medals were offered, as hands gripped his as hollow words like hero and service filled the suffocating air. Deep inside, his world had collapsed in absolute silence. The moment the mission was over, Ethan vanished from the Navy. No ceremony, no final speeches. He walked away, while his record still gleamed, unable to escape the truth that stalked his every breath. He had saved strangers while failing the only two people who mattered. He fled to the mountains. The cabin was a secret buried deep in the forest, miles from anything that resembled a town. Its timbered walls were stained dark by years and relentless snow. It was small, Spartan, and utterly isolated, everything Ethan's broken soul craved. The silence there held no judgment. It simply was. And the only soul who shared that silence was Shadow. Shadow was a 7-year-old German shepherd, his coat of black and tan now dusted with the first silver of age around his muzzle. He carried the strong, lean frame of a dog built for duty muscles still defined beneath joints that were beginning to slow. His ears remained on high alert, even at rest, and his intelligent, watchful eyes never strayed far from Ethan's form. Shadow had served at his side in SEAL Team 5. His senses honed for detection, for tracking, for protection. When Ethan left the military, a rare exception was granted for Shadow to retire with him. They spoke a language without words. Two soldier survivors haunted by those who were not. That afternoon, the sky began its premature descent into darkness, a familiar pattern in the heart of winter. Ethan pulled on worn gloves and stepped into the biting air, with Shadow needing to gather firewood. The forest was hushed, the snow absorbing every sound but the sharp crunch beneath their boots. Suddenly, Shadow froze. His frame went rigid, his ears pivoting forward as a deep, anxious rumble vibrated from his chest. It wasn't a growl of aggression, but a sound of pure alarm. "Shadow," Ethan whispered. The dog ignored him, bolting straight into the tree line. Ethan pursued him, his heart hammering with an adrenaline he hadn't felt since the battlefield. They plunged deeper into the woods, thorny branches tearing at his jacket as the wind shrieked through the pines like a dire premonition. And then he saw her. A small child no older than 5 was huddled in the snow. She looked agonizingly small, enveloped in a threadbare pink coat, ripped at every seam. Strands of dark hair were plastered wetly to her cheeks. Her lips already tinged a chilling shade of blue. She clutched her knees, trembling uncontrollably, her gaze vacant as if she were already slipping from this world. For a single, paralyzing moment, Ethan was frozen. The frail outline of her body, the tiny size of her boots, the violent shuddering of her shoulders. The image of his own daughter seared through his mind, an old wound tearing open anew. Shadow's sharp bark shattered the vision, yanking Ethan back to reality. Ethan fell to his knees beside her, his hands immediately in motion, searching for a pulse, while his body shielded her from the biting wind. His combat training took over, swift and methodical, even as his own heart constricted with a pain that felt too much like grief. "You're going to be okay." He murmured the words, a prayer more than a promise. He swaddled her in his heavy coat and gently lifted her into his arms. He turned back towards the cabin, carrying a fragile life from the snow, oblivious that the profound silence he had sought was about to be irrevocably shattered. The scent of burning wood and pine filled the cabin as Ethan carefully laid the small girl on a rug near the hearth. He moved with an ingrained certainty, instinct guiding his hands as he enveloped her in heavy wool blankets, chafing warmth back into her frozen fingers, monitoring her respirations relentlessly until they finally became even. His movements were precise and controlled, but a storm raged behind his clenched jaw. Shadow settled down beside the child, curving his massive frame around her like a guardian. The dog's watchful eyes remained fixed on her face, his ears alert to the slightest noise, as if he were protecting something impossibly precious. And then at last, the girl began to stir. Her eyelids trembled open, revealing eyes that slowly focused on the strange wooden ceiling, then on the man's worried face above her. There were no tears. She just watched him, her silence a shield, as if noise itself had once been a weapon against her. "My name is Leah." She breathed the words, a fragile thread in the silence. Ethan nodded, his voice a soft anchor. "I'm Ethan. You're safe now." Leah swallowed hard, clutching the blanket like a lifeline as her hands began to tremble. A tremor born not of cold, but of memory. When she spoke again, her story escaped in broken pieces. Like the shards of a narrative, she was forbidden to speak whole. She spoke of a room sealed by a lock, a chamber starved of light. She confessed she lived there with a mother who smelled of soap and terror, a woman who whispered even when they were utterly alone. Her mother's rules were simple. Be quiet, be good, never ask why. Then Leah spoke of a man, a visitor who would appear from the silence. He was a man in clean clothes with exhaustion etched into his face. He never raised his voice. He never offered a smile. His gaze would never linger. If their eyes met, he'd flinch away as if ashamed of being seen. And then, there was the woman. Leah fumbled for the words, trying to make sense of her through a child's eyes. She recalled the sharp, unnerving click of the woman's shoes on the floorboards, a voice that cut like glass even in a whisper, and a presence so heavy it seemed to steal the very air from the room. In those moments, her mother's grip would tighten on her hand, a silent, painful warning. Through it all, Ethan listened without a word. Each chilling detail embedded itself in his soul, forming the jagged edges of a picture he could not yet see completely, but whose final image he already dreaded. As sleep finally claimed her curled beneath the blankets, a profound quiet reclaimed the cabin. Shadow remained at her side, a steady, breathing guardian. Ethan sat alone by the fire, the flames pulling unwelcome memories from the dark. He thought of phone calls that came too late, of truths that arrived long after they could change anything, of the price paid for acting too fast, and the steeper price for waiting too long. The word police drifted through his mind like an unfinished prayer. It would be so simple. A single call, a report, and the machine would grind into motion, sirens, interrogations, search parties sweeping the woods. And yet Ethan's hand never moved. If Leah had been left behind by accident, someone would have been searching. If she was truly lost, someone's frantic shouts would be tearing through the snow. Instead, this was a deliberate act of abandonment. And if someone had taken such extreme measures to hide this child, then another, a person yet unseen, might be holding her mother. Ethan knew the catastrophic cost of revealing a plan too soon. He had seen it overseas again and again. Panic would erase every trace. Loose ends would be severed. He stared into the flames, making his decision in the crushing silence. No calls. Not yet. The morning unfolded slowly with pale winter light creeping through the frosted windows when Leah woke again. This time she sat up, her gaze locked on Shadow with a quiet awe as he wagged his tail with a deliberate gentleness, as if taking great care not to frighten her. Ethan made oatmeal on the small stove, adding honey by reflex, a habit that had been Sarah's. As he set the bowl before Leah, she paused, then gripped it with both hands, her eating slow and measured, almost ritualistic, like someone unaccustomed to having enough. Over the next several days, Leah did not leave the cabin. Ethan procured clean clothes for her from a donation box in town. He brushed her dark hair with a cautious hand, clumsy at first, and unsure of his own strength. Leah watched him through the mirror, her gaze fixed on his reflection, as if memorizing every detail. Shadow followed her everywhere. If she moved, he moved. If she slept, he lay sentinel at the door. One night, a fierce gust of wind rattled the window panes. Leah flinched, and Shadow instantly pressed his head gently into her side, waiting until she softened. At night, Ethan stayed awake long after Leah was asleep. He watched her chest rise and fall in a steady rhythm, listening to the muted sounds of the surrounding woods. He knew with a chilling certainty this was no temporary choice. By keeping her by remaining silent, he had crossed a line he could never uncross. He had chosen to be her protector, not with a badge or a desperate phone call, but with his own life and his self-imposed isolation, his own past. And deep inside, underneath the grief and guilt that had been his constant companions for years, something utterly unfamiliar began to surface. Purpose. Time in the Leavenworth Pines cabin did not hurry. It moved with a quiet grace, like snow, gently accumulating branch by branch, measuring the passing years without a sound, but with subtle shifts only visible to those who remained to witness them. Leah started elementary school the autumn after the winter she was found. She was still small for her age, her shoulders narrow, and her dark hair seemed determined to never stay in place, no matter the delicate precision Ethan used each dawn. A fragile pallor clung to her skin, a testament to years lived in shadow. yet her eyes burned with an unnerving awareness, a silent observer deciphering the unspoken currents of the room before ever uttering a word. Each morning unfolded in a solemn, unbreakable ritual. Before the first hint of light, Ethan would rise, his movements a quiet, deliberate ballet. He'd coax the stove to life, brewing his own bitter coffee while gently warming the milk for Leah. Beyond the cabin's warmth, the frozen world groaned under his boots, a stark cry, as he scraped the ice from the windshield. Leah sat in silence at the table, her backpack a silent promise of the day ahead, her small hands clutching a warm mug. By the door stood Shadow, 7 years old at the time, a bastion of strength with his broad chest, his dark coat already kissed with the silver of age around his powerful muzzle. His gaze never left Leah, fixed with the unwavering intensity of a soldier at his post. As the bus rumbled to a stop, a single fleeting wave from Leah was her only farewell. Shadow held his vigil, a stoic statue, until the road swallowed the bus from sight. Only then did he turn back to the silent cabin as the days began to unspool with a fragile peace. In the afternoons, Leah would lose herself in homework at the old wooden table, while Ethan mended tools that were never broken and smoothed wood that was already like silk. His hands were not mending the cabin, but the fractures within himself, because the silence was a treacherous space where memories lurked. Between them, Shadow was a living anchor, his steady breath holding the room together. Ethan imparted the only lessons he truly knew: how to command her space when she spoke, feet firm, shoulders back, a fortress of one. He taught her to breathe into the heart of fear, not flee from it. He taught her to hear the secrets of the forest, the weight of silence, the truth in the words left unsaid. He would trace the veins of a map with a weathered finger, revealing the secrets of distance and landmark, teaching her to navigate a broken world. How to find her way by the sun when everything had changed. How to master the chaos within when lost, because panic was a thief of life, and clarity was the only salvation. And Leah, she absorbed it all. But in her quiet way, she was teaching him too, in a language that had no words. She taught him to breathe again, to see the defiant green pushing through the last of the snow, to find humor in burned bread or a forgotten multiplication table, to let a moment of peace exist without waiting for the other shoe to drop. By the time she reached middle school, Leah had discovered the power of her own voice. She joined the debate club, unsettling her teachers with a profound composure. She never raised her voice. She had no need to conquer the room. Instead, she listened, absorbing every word before speaking with a chilling clarity and precision. And one day, Ethan went to watch her. He stood at the rear of the hall, arms folded across his chest, his beard now streaked with silver. He watched her debate, not to vanquish her opponent, but to uncover the truth. A strange, weighty pride swelled deep within his chest. It was during this time that Leah's inquiries about her mother began, the questions emerging delicately one by one. Sometimes over dinner, other times during the long drives back, and occasionally late at night when the wind pressed against the cabin. Ethan never deceived her. He told her what he knew and admitted what he did not. He told her that her mother was alive, but that the truth was tangled. He explained that some doors, if opened prematurely, could bring far more pain than comfort. "I promise," he said once, his eyes meeting hers. "We will find her when it is safe." Leah simply nodded. Her trust in him was absolute. One winter night, a violent storm rattled the windows with enough force to awaken the forest. Leah woke up screaming from a nightmare she could not recall. Ethan was at her door in seconds, his heart pounding, his instincts still razor-sharp after years away from that life. She clung to his shirt, trembling, her breathing shallow. "Don't leave," she whispered. Ethan held her stiffly at first, then with his entire being, his arms wrapping around her with a tenderness he believed he had lost forever. When her breathing finally slowed, her voice emerged small and uncertain. "Dad?" The word hung in the air, a fragile bridge between them. Ethan closed his eyes, his mind flashing with images, another child's laughter, another bedtime story, another life cut tragically short. For a harrowing moment, the grief threatened to pull him under, but then he felt Leah's small fingers tighten their grip. "I'm here," he said, his voice low. After that night, the word became a part of them. Shadow aged, as all good soldiers do, quietly and without complaint. His steps became slower. His hearing faded, but his protective watch never faltered. He stopped running ahead on their walks, choosing to stay near Leah, his body brushing against her leg, as if to constantly reassure himself of her presence. Then, one winter morning, Shadow did not rise from his place by the fire. Ethan knelt by his side, his large hands trembling as he stroked the still, quiet fur. Leah understood in an instant. She knelt as well, pressing her forehead against Shadow's. They buried him beneath a tall pine just behind the cabin. The snow was deep, and the earth was frozen solid. Leah gently placed Shadow's old collar upon the freshly turned soil, fingers clinging just a moment too long. Their tears fell not only for Shadow, but for the silent burdens he had borne for them. And as their sorrow subsided, a profound, unspoken truth settled between them. Grief, they now understood, was a path they no longer had to walk alone. High school unfolded in a quiet rhythm. Leah offered her time. She aided her neighbors. She became a listener, her words measured and few. Her teachers saw the steel in her discipline, the depth of her focus, the stillness of her spirit. Scholarships began to arrive, each one earned in silence without a hint of celebration. College drew her physically farther from the cabin, yet her heart never left. She would return during every break, each time a little taller, her confidence a quiet flame. She brought back tales, new questions, and unfolding plans. Ethan, a bit older, a step slower, listened with unwavering attention. The cabin was her anchor in the storm of the world. And so was he. Leah graduated at the very pinnacle of her class. Ethan stood silently in the bustling crowd, his hands clasped tightly behind him, a pride shining in his eyes that he made no effort to conceal. As a wave of applause washed over the auditorium, he made a silent, unbreakable vow to himself. He would bring her mother home. The city of Seattle roared with a loudness Leah hadn't remembered from her childhood. Towers of glass mirrored the muted gray of the winter sky, and a bitter wind from the bay sliced through the concrete canyons. Yet she moved through the chaos with an unnerving calm, her coat buttoned to her chin, her posture erect, each step deliberate and sure. Her years in the isolated cabin had forged in her an ability to become invisible. Aurelia's empire consumed an entire block near the heart of the city. Its headquarters ascended in pale stone and cold steel, a structure both elegant and deeply intimidating. Within its walls, the air carried the subtle scent of expensive perfume and polished wood. Leah began in a junior position, a quiet observer, her dark hair always pulled back, her attire simple yet impeccably precise. She rarely spoke, her work was meticulous, and she absorbed everything far more than anyone ever realized. But her unwavering diligence did not escape notice. Within months, her supervisors began entrusting her with small but significant responsibilities. Within a single year, she found herself invited into the meetings where real power was brokered. Leah never hurried. She was learning the very heartbeat of the corporation. The silent codes of conduct, the way influence shifted like a shadow, never raising its voice. And it was then that Adriana first began to notice her. Adriana Aurelia was Leah's perfect antithesis. Tall, flawlessly groomed, her honey blonde hair always sculpted into perfection, a confident lift to her chin that bespoke entitlement. Adriana moved through the halls of Aurelia as if she were walking through a kingdom that was hers by birthright. Her clothes screamed a calculated wealth, her laughter a sharp, untroubled ring. She could turn on the charm like a switch, and just as easily turn it off. Adriana loved the sound of her own voice. Through endless lunches and lingering afternoons, she painted pictures of the family estate, of glittering parties, and always of her mother's iron-fisted control. Then one night, Loosened by one too many glasses of wine at a corporate gathering, Adriana let slip a chilling detail about a locked room in the old villa. "It's the most absurd thing," she scoffed with a dismissive wave. "A strange obsession of my mother's. One room that's completely forbidden. Not even the staff can enter. Only her. And the driver." Leah's smile remained fixed, a perfect mask, but behind it her world went still. That night she laid it all bare for Ethan. They sat at the small cabin table, a map unfurled between them as the fire burned low. Ethan absorbed every word in silence, his expression a stone carving. The years had honed him, shaping him into something different. Streaks of gray now dominated his hair. His beard was kept short, and his gaze was unwavering. Grief was no longer his master, but it had etched its story into his face lines that time would never erase. "A locked room," he repeated, his voice a whisper. "And a driver." Nothing more was said. Nothing more was needed. A week later, as the Aurelia family jetted off to a winter gala in New York, Ethan made the solitary drive to Seattle. The villa loomed on the city's edge, a fortress of iron gates and hushed gardens. A fine layer of snow blanketed the hedges like a shroud. The house was a dark tomb. Ethan moved as he always had, slow, deliberate, a ghost in the shadows. He slipped in through a service entrance, deftly bypassing cameras, counting each step by heart. The air was thick with the scent of money and oppression. Upstairs, he found it a heavy oak door, fortified with a newer lock guarding the very room Adriana had described. Inside was a cold, sterile space filled with filing cabinets, old ledgers, and sealed envelopes. It wasn't a room, it was a vault of secrets. He took only what mattered. Back in the fragile safety of the cabin, Ethan and Leah painstakingly sorted through the stolen history. They uncovered payment records stretching back years' funds allocated to a secluded property for maintenance medical supplies and absolute silence. They found notes scribbled in a woman's severe, angular hand, full of instructions and warnings. And then buried among them, a plan drafted long ago. It laid out in chilling detail how a child was to be removed from the world quietly and permanently. Leah's hands trembled as she read. Ethan started making copies. He made a call to the one man he could trust. Daniel Cross, defined by a scarred jawline and unwavering gray eyes, had once served with Ethan. He now held a senior role within the FBI. Daniel's approach was deliberate, methodical, a discipline forged by years of seeing cases crumble prematurely. "I'll keep it contained," Daniel said quietly over the line. "When you're ready." Meanwhile, Leah maintained her position at Aurelia. Trust she found built slowly before arriving in a sudden flood. One afternoon, Adriana vented about her mother's private office, complaining about how the driver was a constant shadowy presence. Leah listened, absorbing every detail. Later, in the profound silence, she slipped a small recording device behind a bookshelf in the office. It wasn't elaborate, not a flashy piece of tech, just an act of patience. The days stretched on. Then late one night, Ethan listened to the playback. He heard a woman's voice, cold and chillingly controlled, speaking of a house outside the city, of keeping someone contained, of not allowing old mistakes to resurface. An address followed, spoken with unmistakable clarity. Ethan closed his eyes. The agonizing years of waiting were finally over. Snow fell in a thick, soundless curtain as Ethan drove north, his headlights cutting a solitary tunnel through the oppressive dark. Leah sat beside him, hands folded in her lap, her face a mask of calm that came from long practice rather than any sense of comfort. She was wrapped in a heavy coat, wearing the quiet determination she had forged growing up in the isolation of the cabin. No words passed between them. None were needed. The road tightened as the city lights vanished, and the pines closed in, their branches groaning under the weight of snow. Ethan killed the engine far from the house. They would proceed from there on foot. The house materialized from the darkness between the trees, a low structure with a single dim light glowing inside. It was not old, but it felt forgotten, neglected as if the world had deliberately passed it by. The caretaker stepped outside to smoke, pulling his coat tight against the biting cold. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s with thinning hair, his posture slouched from boredom rather than vigilance. Ethan approached from behind, swift and precise. The man had no time to even register a threat. Within seconds he was restrained, stunned but unharmed, and gently guided to the ground, where he was left bound behind a shed. Leah watched without a trace of fear. She had seen this part of Ethan before. Not violent, not cruel. A controlled, chilling efficiency defined their focus. They breached the house, and a wave of stale air, carrying the antiseptic sting of disinfectant and profound solitude. Harsh lights exposed sparsely furnished rooms. Not a single photograph, no soul, only cold function. And then in the deepest room they finally found her. She sat perched on a narrow cot, swallowed by a worn sweater several sizes too large. Her hair, once rich and dark, was now a whisper of gray at her temples, hastily pulled into a loose knot. Her body was slight, her shoulders curved inward, her hands a testament to years of silent suffering. As she looked up, her eyes, sharp with terror, locked with Leah's. And in that instant, a flicker of recognition pierced through the fear, followed by a wave of disbelief. "Mom!" Leah breathed the word, a fragile prayer. The woman's breath hitched, and she surged to her feet, her knees giving way as she grasped for the wall, the world spinning beneath her. Time had carved new lines upon her face, etching deep furrows, her skin pulled taut over a framework of waiting. Yet her eyes, they remained unchanged. They always do. Ethan mused the true compass that guides lost souls home. Leah closed the distance in 3 swift strides as her mother collapsed to her knees, her arms desperately encircling her daughter. A sound tearing from her throat, part sob, part sacred invocation. They clung to one another as if releasing their hold would shatter the fragile reality of this moment. "I thought you were lost," the woman choked out. "But I'm here," Leah affirmed. "I'm right here." Ethan turned, granting them their sacred space as his focus shifted to the perimeter. The windows, the doors, the shadowed hallway. An unnerving silence held. They slipped away in the pre-dawn gloom. Back at the cabin, a welcoming fire already danced. Ethan prepared warm tea and laid out blankets. Leah gently guided her mother to the couch, settling her down, but never moving away, as if any space between them might unravel their fragile miracle. Long after Leah succumbed to exhaustion curled by the hearth's warmth, her mother's eyes remained open, watching. She stared into the flames for what felt like an eternity before her voice emerged. Her name, she said, was Marisol. She was a small, delicate woman, her olive skin having lost its warmth over the years. Her dark eyes were clouded not by age, but by a deep, weary exhaustion. Her voice was a soft whisper, each word carefully measured, a habit forged in years of caution. Even now in freedom, she spoke as if the very walls held their breath to listen. And then she unburdened her soul to Ethan. Her story began at the Aurelia estate, where she had arrived as a young woman hired merely as a housekeeper. She moved through the house with a quiet diligence, thankful for the stability of her work. But the master of the estate had taken notice of her, a silent, unsettling gaze that promised nothing good. It was a swift, unwanted violation, and to refuse meant facing consequences she simply could not afford to risk. Upon discovering she was with child, she pleaded for her release. Instead, the lady of the house intervened with a chilling plan of her own. Marisol and Leah were then concealed in a locked room buried deep within the estate. 5 years vanished there. 5 years marked by whispered bedtime stories, by precious slivers of light from beneath a door, and by the solemn promises a mother made to her daughter when their world had shrunk to 4 walls. But as Leah grew, becoming too curious, too much of a presence, the woman offered a final, cruel solution. Leah was to be sent to a remote orphanage, Given a supposed chance at a normal life, Marisol would be permitted to live quietly elsewhere, far from the estate, on the condition that she never breathe a word of what had transpired. Marisol had no choice but to agree. She could not have imagined the betrayal that came next. She was driven to a house in the forest, locked inside and utterly isolated from news from time and from the truth. Years bled into one another. She never knew if Leah was alive or dead and lived with a guilt that offered no sleep. When Marisol finally finished her story, her hands trembled. Ethan's gaze was a steady anchor. "You did not abandon her," he said. "She was stolen from you." At those words, Marisol finally broke. The sound that escaped her was primal and raw as decades of imprisoned grief tore free. They found a fragile peace at the cabin together. In the mornings, Marisol would cook simple meals with Leah, her hands recalling motions they hadn't known in years. Their words were fragmented at first. Laughter when it came was a cautious thing. Trust followed taking root slowly. Ethan watched from a careful distance, giving them space, but always near enough to steady them when they faltered. For the first time since that harrowing winter night in the forest, Leah slept through the night without fear. The rap on the door came just before dawn. Ethan was already up. Years in the service had trained his body to awaken before the sound, before the threat. He stepped onto the porch as dark, unmarked cars rolled silently up the drive, their headlights dimmed against the snow. Daniel Cross stood at the front of the procession, shoulders squared in a dark coat, his breath a cloud in the biting cold. His jaw was as sharp as it had been years prior, his gray eyes resolute, shaped by a long career of carrying the secrets of others without ever flinching. "The time has come," Daniel declared. By midday, a perimeter had closed around the Aurelia estate in Seattle. Federal agents swept through iron gates and marble corridors with a chilling, practiced calm. Records were confiscated, phones silenced. The driver, ashen and trembling, was escorted away in restraints. But the woman, the matriarch, who had commanded this house for decades, stood unyielding and defiant, her posture impeccable, her hair a perfect sculpture, even as the empire she had meticulously built crumbled into dust around her. Her husband, however, was a study in contrast. From across the room, he seemed to have shrunk a smaller man than Leah had ever remembered. His shoulders collapsed beneath a lavish coat that now appeared to be a crushing weight. The hair he'd once so carefully arranged was now threaded with gray he'd long refused to see. And when his gaze found Leah's, his eyes held not fury, not even rage, but a deep and hollow regret that had arrived years too late. The charges came down without delay. Unlawful imprisonment, child abandonment, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. The woman remained silent, and when she finally spoke, it was only to deny, to deflect, to claim it was all a terrible misunderstanding. Her voice was steel, her gaze unyielding, but the man begged for absolution. He waited in a sterile room, his hands clenched so hard his knuckles shone bone white. The moment Leah walked in, he shot to his feet, nearly upending his chair. "I'm so sorry," he choked out, his voice fracturing. "I never intended—" Leah simply raised her hand, silencing him. She stood with a powerful stillness, her expression unreadable but calm. The years had forged her into a woman whose quiet voice carried immense weight. "You share my blood," she said softly. "That is all." He swallowed hard. "My father," she went on, her voice unwavering, "is the one who shielded me from the world when I was defenseless. He is the one who never left." Her words descended like a final judgment. The man bowed his head, defeated. He offered no defense. He didn't move as she turned and walked away. But a story this immense could not be contained. Just 1 week later, Leah's old high school friend, Emily Hart, appeared at the cabin. Emily was a journalist now, with a reporter's sharp gaze, her chestnut hair secured in an efficient knot, and a notebook that was a permanent extension of her hand. She possessed a natural gift for curiosity, for hearing the silent truths people tried so desperately to conceal. Emily joined Leah and Marisol at the rustic wooden table, a warm fire whispering behind them. The interview began gently, without theatrics or interrogation. Marisol's words came tentatively. At first, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, but her voice gained strength with every sentence. She described the chilling reality of that locked room, of the endless years that bled into one another without seasons, the suffocating silence, and the agonizing belief that her child was simply gone from this world. Then Leah spoke, her voice a quiet counterpoint, telling of the secluded cabin, the stranger who became her rescuer, and the slow, fragile lesson of what it means to feel safe. The video went live 2 days later. It ignited a firestorm, spreading with a speed no one could have anticipated. From coast to coast, people were captivated, watching, listening, and sharing. The account of nearly 30 years in captivity, of a child erased, and a mother who endured an unknowable fate, transformed into something far more profound than just a crime. It was a reckoning. A torrent of support flooded the small cabin. Emails, messages from souls who had weathered their own private storms of silence. Leah absorbed some, Ethan sifted through others. Marisol could only manage a few, still carefully navigating how to breathe in the open world. And as she healed, the Aurelia brand began to hemorrhage. Sponsors vanished. Its value plummeted. In a matter of weeks, the empire that once seemed invincible started to crack under the immense pressure of the truth. Then one day, Adriana appeared. She lingered at the property's edge, her coat hopelessly thin against the biting mountain air, every trace of her signature confidence stripped away. Stripped of her family's fortress of power, she looked fragile, almost childlike. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Not all of it." Leah watched her, a long, searching silence stretching between them. "I believe you," she finally conceded. "But belief can't erase the damage that was done." Adriana could only nod, tears cutting clean paths through her perfect makeup. She turned and departed without another word. And in time, Leah heard that she had devoted herself to a foundation for displaced women and children. It couldn't rewrite history, but it was a start. That evening, as the sun bled its final colors behind the trees, Ethan stood with Leah on the porch. The snow cast a gentle, ethereal glow upward, painting their world in shades of pale, clean light. "You did something incredible," he said softly. Leah met his gaze. "We did," she corrected. He nodded in agreement. From inside, Marisol watched them through the window, her expression more peaceful than it had been in decades. For the first time in nearly 30 years, no locks stood between her and the night. The collapse of Aurelia wasn't a thunderous crash. There were no grand, dramatic pronouncements, no single definitive moment to mark its demise. It crumbled from within, a quiet decay, spreading like rot through ancient timber. The stock values began to slip, and then they imploded. Lifelong partners began to sever ties one after another, quietly citing a crisis of conscience. The name once spoken with reverence became a whispered curse. In a matter of months, the entire empire had vanished into thin air. Adriana bore the collapse more acutely than anyone could have fathomed. Stripped of the layers of privilege that had always shielded her from the world, she seemed to fold inward a shadow of her former self. Her piercing confidence had dulled to a faint glimmer. The designer gowns were gone, supplanted by modest coats and hesitant, careful steps. When she finally came to face Leah again, she brought no excuses, no rationalizations. She lingered at the very edge of the community center's grounds, her hands clenched, shoulders rigid with a silent tension. Her blonde hair was tied back stark and unadorned, her face a pale, bare canvas of remorse. I can't expect forgiveness," she whispered the words, barely escaping her lips. "I just had to say, I am so profoundly sorry, for all I gained from it, for everything I never dared to question." Leah watched her, the silence stretching into a long, heavy moment. She didn't move closer, but she refused to turn her back. "Actions will always speak louder than apologies," Leah finally replied. Adriana simply nodded. It was more than she had any right to ask for. In time, Leah heard that Adriana had walked away from the corporate world completely. She was now volunteering, dedicating her time to displaced women and children left behind. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a step toward the light. The court's ruling was delivered seasons later. A settlement was awarded to Leah and her mother, not as an act of charity, but as a formal recognition of the deep wounds inflicted. Ethan sat beside them in that courtroom, his posture a ramrod of steel, his expression a mask. For him, the money was never a prize to be won. He saw it as a profound responsibility. They wasted no time. A community center began to breathe life into a refurbished building on the outskirts of town. It was nothing extravagant, just polished wood floors, a warm, inviting light, and a kitchen forever filled with the faint, comforting aroma of soup. The common room held shelves of donated books and a welcoming assembly of mismatched chairs. It soon became a sanctuary for children who had no home to call their own, for women relearning the very meaning of safety for veterans, still carrying the weight of wars deep within their souls long after the last shot was fired. Ethan became its quiet guardian. He would mend broken doors, guide others through calming breathing exercises, and simply sit with men haunted by sleepless nights, waiting in shared silence until the words were ready to surface. Leah, in turn, orchestrated programs, tutoring, and legal aid. She learned to listen with the same undivided attention Ethan once gave her. And through it all, her mother Marisol began the slow, delicate journey back to the world of the living. She cooked. She cleaned. She spoke to the women seeking shelter, her voice an unwavering, gentle force. Her very presence was a gentle comfort. She never preached about survival. She was a living testament to it. Back home, life took on a simple, almost sacred quality. They broke bread together, burning dinner on occasion, and their laughter echoed more often than either had anticipated. Ethan never pushed for more, never offered empty promises. He was simply a constant morning after morning, night after night. Marisol felt his presence. Trust wasn't a sudden revelation. It was a slow dawn. It arrived in shattered pieces, in the quiet miracle of sleeping through the night and asking Ethan to retrieve something from a shelf she couldn't quite reach. She couldn't. It was in the stillness that replaced the flinch when footsteps echoed behind her. Then, on a winter morning with the air crystalline and sharp, a change arrived. Ethan arrived before dawn to open the center. A blanket of snow clung to the stairs, muffling the world into an immense quiet. It was then that he saw the dog. A German Shepherd pup was waiting just outside the gate, strangely small for its breed. You could just make out the ghost of his ribs beneath a thick, dark coat powdered with snow. One ear pointed straight up, the other flopped as if unsure of its place in the world. His eyes, a profound brown, were intensely searching, and they locked onto Ethan with a gaze that held both deep caution and an unyielding focus. The pup remained silent. He just waited. Ethan sank to his haunches, his heart clenching painfully. He studied the contours of the dog's face, the determined set of his shoulders, the startlingly familiar intelligence in his eyes, and for a breathtaking moment, time folded inward, shadow the steady pressure against his leg, that quiet devotion the way grief itself had once found a place to rest. Ethan reached out a hand, palm open. The pup took one wary step forward, and then another, pressing a cold, wet nose into the center of Ethan's hand. Ethan swallowed hard. Shadow. He breathed the name, a ghost on his lips, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Did you send him to me?" He gathered the shivering puppy into his embrace, feeling the small body tremble, feeling life and warmth returning to it. The dog exhaled a sound ancient and weary and rested its head completely against Ethan's heart. Behind him, Leah stood in the doorway, tears carving paths down her cheeks as a smile finally broke free. "You're starting over," she whispered. Ethan looked from the puppy back to her, a deep understanding passing between them. "We are," he corrected her gently. He would name him Shade. Not as a replacement, he clarified, but as a continuation. By evening, the once silent center was echoing with the laughter of children. The kitchen hummed with warmth and life, and Shade fittingly darted after Shadows on the floor, his tail wagging with pure, unbridled joy, stumbling over his own feet. Ethan watched with a tranquility he hadn't known in decades. The past could never be erased. It never would be, but it no longer held them captive. And in the hush between what was lost and what was found, a new life founded on love and not fear began to take root. Sometimes miracles don't descend with thunder or a flash of light. Sometimes they arrive in the quiet pause of a stranger, a door that opens, or a heart that refuses to look away. Perhaps God didn't intend to erase the pain these souls carried. Instead, he wove their paths together at the perfect moment, so that pain would not get the final say. If you are watching this feeling lost, broken, or unseen, remember this truth. No step you have taken was wasted. No tear went unnoticed. Even in the harshest seasons, a divine purpose is unfolding often through the most ordinary hands, achieving extraordinary good. If this story touched your soul, please share it with someone who may need some hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where this story found you. Your words carry more weight than you will ever know. And please don't forget to subscribe, so we can continue to share these stories of faith, redemption, and second chances. May God bless you, protect you, and walk alongside you wherever you are tonight. You are not alone.